Across pretty much any sport, there's going to be players that get overrated, players that get underrated, players that probably don't get enough credit, players that get more credit than they deserve. It's just how things work. Sometimes those players don't actually get any credit till their career ends, and sometimes they do. It really depends. It's kind of funny because the football community loves going on and on about how underrated certain players are until those players actually start getting that recognition. Then it's all, what the fuck, what's going on? Rodri's Ballon d'Or win is one of the funniest examples of this whole thing. Him getting a Ballon d'Or was a win for this category of player. It's one of the first times their importance has been widely acknowledged at this level in a while. It's usually always goal scorers first, the guys doing all the flicks on the wing and cutting inside and scoring the bangers from outside the box. They're normally the center of all the praise and the awards. It's not common the Rodri type players get near a Ballon d'Or. The backlash towards his win was pretty indicative of the way we treat that brand of players. Completely irreplaceable and often the most important part of the team, but sometimes not flashy or exciting enough to actually be praised like the big goal scorers. So we pat them on the head and tell them they're underrated and they deserve more love, and then go back to ignoring them in favor of the Mbappes or the Bales. Then after they retire, all of a sudden the revisionism starts and everybody starts saying, oh, how come he wasn't more praised during his career? He needed more love. Well, that's kind of our job, ain't it? We're supposed to be the ones gassing them up, but the second they actually do get gassed up, we act like it's the end of the world. Busquets is one of my favorite examples of this. Obviously, in the era that he played in, he was never truly going to contend for a Ballon d'Or, no matter how incredible he was. But just one Ballon d'Or nomination in his entire career? That doesn't sound a little insane for arguably the best DM ever? He never really fully got his flowers from the overall football world till he retired and Barca was lost without him. Everybody started making the little comps of him twirling and spinning in the midfield, and suddenly he was getting all the love in the world after generally being a side character his whole career. I remember there was numerous times throughout his career that different coaches and retired players highlighted how important he was, but outside of them and Barcelona fans, how many times was he truly given the respect he deserved? It's understandable, I guess, because he was probably the simplest player in a team full of flashy superstars, but it's just an example of how even the most important players get brushed aside. This tends to happen to midfielders the most for obvious reasons. Griezmann was France's best player the majority of the 2022 World Cup when he played midfielder, but Mbappe's 8 goals and his final hat-trick, along with the fact that Griezmann wasn't that great against Argentina, kind of snatched the limelight from an all-time great World Cup performance. Michael Carrick is one of my favorite examples of a midfielder that weirdly doesn't get enough credit. He was crucial in that Champions League win in 2008 and was elite for years in that United team, literally almost a decade straight before he got old and washed. Some of those knockout performances in the UCL over the years too. Home against Roma in 2007, away against Schalke in 2011. Shit, both legs against Chelsea that same year. He doesn't get put with some of the names he probably should be, to be honest. Replacing Roy Keane isn't something that just anybody can do. It's kind of funny that this whole midfielder thing low-key happened in reverse in the 2018 World Cup when it comes to Croatia. Yes, I'm bringing this up again. I'm never going to stop bringing it up until we get rid of that annoying-ass narrative that Modric did it by himself. It genuinely aggravates me. You wouldn't believe how many people still think 2018 Croatia was just Modric and a bunch of random side itches. Rakitic was literally almost as good throughout that World Cup. That's the one that annoys me the most because there were multiple different games where Rakitic outplayed Modric. He put on numerous passing clinics. Some of those long balls and switches were unreal. Perisic was elite. Matter of fact, almost every itch was generally pretty great. Posts like these that get tens of thousands of likes aggravate me to no end, bruh. Yes, Modric was the best of them all, but somehow that got warped into him carrying everybody when that wasn't the case, and now that entire 2018 Croatia squad has become underrated. These guys weren't bums, y'all. It's not just midfielders either. In the golden era, there was so much going on that if you weren't too flashy or didn't put up otherworldly numbers or didn't have something that made you memorable or made you stand out like Robin's cutting in, great attackers were often forgotten too. Tevez was a ridiculous player, an insane link-up specialist, and a key part of that Juve squad. Obviously, he's remembered mainly in Manchester as the other guy that was there with Ronaldo and Rooney at United before making the switch to City, but in my opinion, I enjoyed him the most at Juventus. That Pirlo, Pogba, Vidal midfield, Marquisio too, along with having Chiellini and Bonucci out back was so incredible that Tevez kind of became an afterthought, low-key, in that Juve team, despite the fact that he was pretty crucial too. It didn't help that he was only there for 2 years and he randomly decided to go back to Argentina at only 30 years old, despite the fact that he just had one of the best seasons of his career. His movement was so intelligent though. Look at this Vucinic goal from early in his first season at Juve. Simply drags the center back out to make space for the Vucinic run, and you know Bonucci is picking out that that pass any day of the week. That's an easy bucket. His best trait to me, though, like I said before, was his hold-up play and his strength, which was crazy for a guy his size. He was so smart in and around the box, but that Juve team was wildly entertaining, and he was one of the big reasons. I'm actually not too sure how Tevez is viewed or talked about these days, because I don't see too many people talk about him at all, besides as the third wheel of the Rooney, Ronaldo, Tevez front three at United, which says a lot about how much the rest of his career is kind of glossed over. Mandzukic would probably have been way more applauded in different eras considering his big game resume, but he was misfortunate enough to just be good in an era of aliens. Now, if I had to split them up into three categories, it would probably look like this. One is the players that used to be underrated, then everybody acknowledged they were underrated, and once everyone says you're underrated, are you really still underrated? Some are still in a weird place, though, where everyone acknowledges they need more respect, but they still don't get put in conversations they should. Whether Griezmann overall is underrated or not completely depends on who you're talking to. Same for a guy like David Silva. Silva is generally viewed as underrated, yet he still doesn't get put in talks he probably should be in. He's more talented than a shit ton of players that are more praised than him, but he had the misfortune of peaking around the same time as Spain's golden generation. We all know how impossible it was to get into that midfield, no matter how elite you were. That kind of leads us into our next category. Category 2 is the players from great teams that kind of get forgotten just because of how much star power was on those teams and the fact that they weren't really too flashy. Busquets, obviously, but you could also look at Thomas Muller and Ambrosini for AC Milan too. He wasn't really a superstar or anything. He's one of those players that was just solid for years though. Going back to those Spanish teams, a couple of those Spanish midfielders barely really got the full national team boost that so many players' legacies get because the team was simply too stacked and they ended up being bench warmers during Spain's reign of terror. Silva barely played in the 2010 World Cup, and in the 2012 Euros, he was forced off to the wing. Juan Mata was keeping that bench hotter than hell in both 2010 and 2012. Fabregas didn't get a single start in 2010, and in 2012, he famously played false nine, which actually worked out pretty well. Santi Cazorla barely saw a sniff of playing time at all in 2012, but he didn't even get called up in 2010. Forget about playing. He's wildly underrated. The combination of bad luck with the timing of his peak when it came to the national team and bad luck with those horrific injuries completely fucked up his career and legacy. The third category is the player that was elite, but he generally played for shitty teams, and his rep kind of gets ruined by lack of trophies and team success. David Villa spent his best years at Valencia. Sure, his time at Barca is probably remembered more, but he'll never really get the respect he deserves because almost his entire prime was at a mid-table club. I want to put Totti here, but he actually did win a fair amount of trophies with Roma, and he's already acknowledged as one of those legends that could have been viewed as a lot greater if they moved on but chose to stay loyal. Off the dome, I'd say maybe Alba. Even as an Arsenal fan, there's no denying how badly we wasted his peak. Who's your favorite example of an underrated player that fits into one of these categories? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, y'all. I'm going to see y'all real soon.